Hohokam ball courts were not the only outside influence in the Sierra Sinagua. Structures similar to the great houses and great kivas of the Chaco regional system were also built and used. What was the relationship between the construction and use of these structures and interaction with the larger regional system? How did they fit into local social needs and developments? You have previously covered the development of the regional system of great houses centered on Chaco Canyon in northwest New Mexico and distributed widely throughout the Four Corners region. These great houses have distinctive architecture and are at the center of larger dispersed communities. John Stein, who has studied the distribution of Chaco great houses, suggests that some structures in the Flagstaff area are great houses. While perhaps not as great as Pueblo Bonito and Chaco Canyon, sites like Ridge Ruin and Wupaki are great in their local contexts, were ritual centers for larger dispersed communities, and had distinctive architectural characteristics of great houses that were unlike local forms of architecture. Ridge Ruin is about a mile and a half east of Winona Village, one of the post-eruption ball court villages discussed in the previous section. Prior to construction of the Great House on top of a volcanic outcrop, there was a large village like that at Winona, with clusters of pit houses dispersed around 2 ball courts. Tree ring dates from excavated pit houses indicate occupation began immediately after the eruption, and ceramics associated with the ball courts suggests that they fell out of use around AD 1115, although one may have fallen out of use earlier. By building in this spot overlooking the ball courts, the Great House occupied a location that was already special socially and probably spiritually as well. The earliest cutting dates associated with the Chaco component of the structure are AD 1116, and the site was occupied until around 1180. The original core of the building consists of Chaco-style masonry built shortly after AD 1116. The 4 central rooms were 2 stories high. Associated with the pueblo are a series of terraced plazas created with low masonry retaining walls and fill. Facing onto the lowest plaza level is a raised platform built with low retaining walls and earthen fill. Dismantled and backfilled pit houses under the terraced plazas suggests that these plazas were constructed in the late 1130s, when other expansion of the pueblo occurred. The Chaco-style masonry at the core used fine tabular sandstone that is not readily available nearby. Like masonry found in the great houses of Chaco Canyon, the slabs were shaped and evenly coursed, and chinking stones were inserted into the mortar of the joints. Tree ring dates indicate that later additions were made after AD 1137, and this later expansion was completed in a different masonry style using basalt and limestone. The site continued to be an important community center, but the need to reference the architectural style of Chaco Canyon was no longer essential. Around AD 1180, an individual known as the Magician was buried in a pole-roofed grave at Ridge Ruin before it was burned and abandoned. He was in his early 40s, was strongly muscled, and stood 4 to 6 inches taller than the average adult male in the region. A great number of offerings, including numerous ritual objects, were found accompanying him. He is known as the Magician for a set of 13 swallowing sticks. 12 of these had carved wooden handles that were either painted or covered with shell and turquoise mosaic, 3 each with agave leaves, human hands, deer or bighorn sheep hooves, and crescents. The 13th held a single large shell. Opposite the handles was a shaft about 18 inches long that tapered to a blunt point. These were likely used in stick-swallowing rituals like those formerly performed at Hopi, Zuni, and several Karasin-speaking pueblos, as well as among the Navajo, O'odham, and several groups from Southern California. Among the Hopi, stick-swallowing was associated with warfare and male initiation, while at Zuni it was associated with winter weather control, the creation of snows that would melt into the soil and sustain germination of seeds in the spring. At Zuni, stick-swallowing rituals are said to have been introduced from Chaco Canyon. These rituals and the social institutions associated with them may have been introduced to the Flagstaff area at the time Ridge Ruin was constructed, but by the time the magician was buried, they had been adapted to local contexts and needs. Several discrete sets of ritual paraphernalia were found as offerings with the magician. Ethnography can be used to associate each with symbolically and functionally differentiated practices that include summer and winter weather control, male initiation, warfare and dispute resolution, divination, combating witchcraft, and curing. While the magician was an important and powerful man during his lifetime, the offerings don't represent wealth in the contemporary sense of the word. As I will discuss in the final section, I believe that the whole arrangement represented the ritual and political constitution of the local community. Like Ridge Ruin, the original core of Wupaki Pueblo was built using Chaco-style masonry. Also like at Ridge Ruin, there was a Hohokam-style ball court in the background at the far right. The timing of the construction and use of the Wupaki ball court is unclear, but a one-room field house that was built inside the playing field around 1150 suggests that, like other ball courts in the frontier zone, it was in use between 1085 and 1135. The earliest cutting dates are from AD 1106, but the first substantial construction project began soon after AD 1117 and was completed using Chaco-style masonry. Later expansion projects in the 1140s and 1160s did not use this style of masonry. The latest cutting date is 1267, suggesting continued occupation until at least 1275 and the beginning of the megadrought. The Chaco cores of both Wupaki and Ridge Ruin were built about the same time. Ridge Ruin's Chaco core has associated cutting dates of 1116, while Wupaki's has cutting dates of 1117. A swallowing stick with a carved deer or bighorn sheep hoof, like those found with the magician, was recovered from Wupaki by unscientific excavations in the 1920s, so its provenience and context is uncertain. These Chaco-style great houses would have been relatively late in the growth and expansion of the Chaco regional system, as might be expected given their distance from the center. The AD 1130s megadrought prompted a major collapse and reorganization of the Chaco regional system, and during the later years of this drought, both Ridge Ruin and Wupaki underwent major construction projects that expanded the sites, but also largely covered over the Chaco cores. Wupaki also has a large circular structure often called an amphitheater. Excavations in the 1930s showed that this structure had a bench all the way around the interior, but lacked any evidence of support poles for a roof. At the time, it was assumed all Great Kivas were roofed, like excavated examples from Chaco Canyon. But more recent research at sites like the Hinkson site in west central New Mexico has revealed the development of unroofed Great Kivas in communities established after the reorganization of the Chaco system that unfolded in the wake of the 1130s megadrought. As can be seen in this photo, large numbers of people can gather in the Great Kiva. There are 37 Navajo school children and their teachers seated on the bench, and it's not even half full. Without a roof, even more members of the assembled community could gather on the Pueblo's rooftops or on the slope between the Pueblo and the Great Kiva. Wupaki would have been at the western end of the distribution of unroofed Great Kivas that stretches along the Little Colorado River Valley. While 3 other probable Great Kivas have been found on survey, only the one at Wupaki has been excavated. It was built on top of earlier trash deposits, and after it fell out of use, it was filled with trash deposits. Decorated ceramics in these 2 separate deposits can be used to bracket the use of the Great Kiva to between 1180 and 1200. Surface ceramics at the unexcavated Great Kivas suggest similar periods of use. The only known Great Kivas are located in the frontier zone and may have been used to bring communities composed of diverse social groups together. Unlike ball courts, which mark 2 opposing sides, Great Kivas bring all participants together as one. This contrast between the earlier ball courts and later Great Kivas becomes more significant in the next module, where we discuss the relationship that competition and conflict have with the periods of climatic crisis. The use of unroofed Great Kivas does not appear to have been widespread nor long-lived in the Flagstaff area. Local great houses were built using Chaco masonry style just before AD 1120, but by 1140 these were covered over by new construction that did not reference Chaco. These construction episodes were during the latter part of the megadrought and coincident with major changes throughout the Chaco regional system that saw a decline of the center. New ritual practices like stick swallowing may have been introduced from Chaco, and over time they came to be integrated into the local social order. Unroofed Great Kivas, like those from other post-Chaco sites to the east, were briefly used in the frontier zone during the late 1100s, but only a few are known, and the one excavated example was used for 20 years or less. It seems rather than being integrated into the Chaco regional system, populations in the Flagstaff area selectively reinterpreted influences from Chaco into a local context.